We're diving into the world of hexagrams, specifically hexagram 4, which is all about youthful folly, the young shoot, and discovering.
And to really understand the power of Hexagram 4, it helps to connect it back to some of the themes we've explored in previous deep dives, all stemming from Jordan's work, by the way. Remember our conversations about those persistent, unpleasant emotions, those pesky PUEs that tend to pop up at the worst times?
Oh, I think we've all been there. And how those PUEs so often manifest as what Jordan calls Jesse, judgment, emotion, situation, self-image, that inner critic that just loves to chime in.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about how those often lead to those not so helpful coping mechanisms, criticism, rescue fantasies, agitation planning?
Okay, I have to say, those acronyms always make me chuckle, even though the underlying concepts are so spot on. But it's not really about the labels, is it? It's about recognizing those patterns in ourselves. Like, have you ever noticed how when you're really attached to a certain outcome and things don't go your way, that's when those PUEs and CRP reactions tend to take over?
Absolutely. It's like we're clinging to a certain version of reality, a certain version of ourselves, and when that's challenged, it triggers those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving.
Which brings us back to hexagram 4 and this whole idea of youthful folly. It's like that youthful part of us, that young shoot, is so eager to control, to force things to go a certain way.
Yes. And to understand that energy more fully, it helps to look at where Hexagram 4 falls within the bigger picture of the I Ching and the sequence of hexagrams.
Oh, that's right. You were explaining this to me earlier and it reminded me of something Jordan talks about, those levels of thinking from level 1 to level 3.
It's a great connection to make. So if we think of Hexagram 1 as representing that pure potential, that seed of possibility, then Hexagram 2 is like the receptive earth, ready to nurture that seed. But then along comes Hexagram 3, which represents that initial struggle, that burst of energy it takes for the seed to break through the soil.
Okay, so hexagram 3 is like the first hurdle, the first challenge the seed encounters on its journey to becoming a plant.
Precisely. And that's where Hexagram 4 comes in. It's that moment when the sprout finally emerges from the earth, filled with that youthful exuberance and eagerness to grow.
So there's a sense of excitement, of possibility, but also potentially some naivete. Right? Like
Yeah.
that young shoot doesn't yet have the wisdom and experience to understand the challenges it might face along the way.
Exactly. And that's where the youthful folly comes in. It's not about judging that youthful energy as bad or wrong. It's about recognizing that it's often driven by a limited perspective, a belief that we can control everything, that we can somehow outsmart the natural cycles of growth and decay.
It's like that youthful part of us thinks it knows everything and can do anything.
Exactly. It's full of enthusiasm and idealism, but it can also be quite impulsive and impatient.
Which can lead to some, shall we say, interesting life choices.
To put it mildly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, that youthful folly is also the source of our creativity, our passion, our drive to explore and experiment. It's what propels us forward, even if it sometimes leads us down a few winding paths.
I'm starting to see why this hexagram is so fascinating. It's not about condemning that youthful energy, but rather about understanding it, learning from it, and maybe even channeling it in a more conscious way.
And that's where the real discovering begins, right? Not just discovering the world around us, but discovering those deeper parts of ourselves, too.
It's like that journey from level 1 thinking where we're focused on our own needs to level 2 where we see a bigger picture, and then level 3 where we see how connected everything is.
Exactly. Hexagram 4, with its youthful folly, the young shoot, and discovering, represents that whole journey.
So it's not just that initial burst of energy, but also the lessons, the setbacks, the wisdom we gain along the way.
Exactly. And just like that young shoot has to deal with weather the terrain competition from other plants, we face obstacles too.
And those obstacles are often what trigger those PUEs and CRP reactions we talked about.
It's like those patterns are just waiting for the right trigger. Like when someone criticizes your work or a decision you made,
Oh yeah, I've been there.
you instantly get defensive. Retreat to criticism, rescue fantasies, agitation planning, that whole CRI toolkit.
Because that young shoot still thinks it can control everything, wants to avoid discomfort, the threat of not getting what it wants.
Exactly. And that's the opportunity for growth, recognizing those patterns, those echoes of youthful folly, and choosing a different response.
So not suppressing those reactions, but understanding them and then choosing a better way to react.
Yes. And
Yeah.
that's where becoming the impartial witness, approaching things with A3CBM and compassion becomes so important.
We're learning to parent that young shoot with understanding and compassion.
I love that, because it's not about beating ourselves up for those patterns. Those were often formed to protect ourselves when the world felt overwhelming.
It was just trying to do its best with what it knew at the time.
Exactly. As we grow, we develop better tools. more compassionate ways of responding to challenges.
So how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
Move from reacting to being more conscious and compassionate.
That's the big question, isn't it? And Jordan really explores this in his work. But there are practices and perspectives that can help us on that journey.
Like noticing when youthful folly is in control, when we're clinging to an outcome or forcing things.
Yes. And instead of judging, approaching those moments with curiosity and kindness, those reactions aren't the enemy. They're parts of us that want to be understood and loved.
So how do we work with those parts of ourselves, those echoes of youthful folly, in a more conscious way? What are some practical steps?
One powerful practice Jordan talks about is cultivating the perspective of the impartial witness. It's learning to observe our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without judgment, like watching clouds drift by.
That sounds challenging, especially when those PUEs and ARP reactions are in full force.
It takes practice, but the more we cultivate that observer's perspective, the more space we create between ourselves and those reactions. It's like a buffer zone, a breathing room to choose a different response.
So instead of reacting to the critical voice or the urge to control, we pause and observe.
Exactly. And that's where A3CBM comes in. Accepting, acknowledging, and appreciating those parts of ourselves with compassion and a beginner's mind.
We approach ourselves with the same kindness we'd offer a close friend going through a tough time.
Precisely. And that's radical in a world that pushes us to judge ourselves, to strive for an impossible ideal of perfection.
Recognizing that those imperfections, those moments of youthful folly, are opportunities for growth, not something to be ashamed of.
Exactly. And as we embrace those parts, we unlock a new level of freedom and fulfillment, releasing ourselves from the need to control and manipulate everything.
It's surrendering to the flow of life, trusting that even challenges and discomfort are guiding us towards something better.
Beautifully said. That's the magic. Approaching life as a dance, a journey of exploration and discovery, not a battle.
This has been incredibly insightful. I have a whole new understanding of Hexagram for youthful folly and embracing those parts of ourselves we try to hide.
Remember, it's not about instant transformation. It's an ongoing process, a journey of self-discovery.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's resonating most with you about youthful folly and the wisdom of Hexagram 4?
For me, it's a reminder that growth often comes not through force, but through acceptance, compassion, and letting go of control.
I love that. For me, it's the invitation to approach those parts of myself that cling to control with curiosity and kindness. What if instead of judging them, I saw them as opportunities for growth? What a powerful shift.
It is powerful, and it's available to all of us.
So here's a final thought. What if, instead of seeing youthful folly as weakness, we embraced its energy, creativity, and possibility? How would that change how we navigate life's ups and downs? Something to think about. Until next time, happy exploring.